Morning, everybody. It's another rainy day in isolation up here at the bakery. Although my dog doesn't seem to mind too much. He's out there all curled up on the lawn waiting for me to show up and entertain her. But because it's quiet, I figured I'd deal with another topic that's been on my mind, and as the title has said, it is a strange one, I guess, strange title, and it's based on strip mining of sunk costs. And what I want to do is start with an explanation of sunk costs. And I'm going to do that in three different phases. It's going to be personal sunk costs, like stuff that you and I have to deal with directly, and then corporations, and then governments. And I'll start with personal stuff. That's the easiest for now. And let me start with, here, come. Well, we'll start with something real simple. Right here. You see that? My toaster. There we are. All right, so nice cheap toaster. Now I'm starting with toasters because a comedian named John Pinette was had a really cute skit in one of his routines about him purchasing a toaster. But here's what sunk costs mean to you and I. So let's say I paid 20 bucks for this toaster. And that $20 essentially disappears. It is not something that I can normally recover directly back as cash. So if I sold this thing, just not likely to ever happen, I'm not going to get 20 bucks for it. And another aspect of this would be if it broke within a short period of time. So I plug it in and use it 2 or 3 times, and then it quits. What am I going to do? I'm not going to get I haven't got or received my $20 worth of use out of it, so that $20 disappears. The only way you recover from recover the funds that you spent in a sunk cost is actually using the thing that you bought. So in this case, let's say that each time I use this, it's worth $1 to me. So if I use this 20 times, that represents $20, which is the cost of the thing. I've recovered the cost of the item, and that's the only way I'm going to recover that money. And as I use it more beyond that 20 times, then that's all essentially bonus for me. So that's a real simple example of what a sunk cost is. Let's go to something that certainly in North America we are familiar with, and that's buying a new car. Let me get this fixed up again so I don't look quite so goofy. So you buy a brand new car, and as soon as you drive it off the lot, 30% of the value of the car disappears. Poof, just like that. Why? Well, because it's no longer brand new. It's used. Even if you drove it down to the end of the block, put a couple of miles on it, and tried to sell it, you're not going to get the full value that you paid for out of that car. You don't mind that though, because your plan is to use this vehicle, and the value of the car is recovered over a period of time of essentially trouble-free driving. You enjoy the car, you don't have to repair it, you don't have to worry about it, you just get in it, use it, away you go. And unless it's a real lemon, let's say you pay $40,000 for a car, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get $40,000 worth of usable value out of that vehicle. You certainly should expect so. That's a sunk cost, and you recover the money that you've dumped into this thing by using it. There's lots of examples of that out there for personal use. Now, when we get to corporations, that becomes a little bit trickier. And we might as well stay with the car theme and look at automakers. So sunk costs there can really add up quite to really big dollars. So your typical car manufacturer, GM, Ford, whoever, builds a production facility, a factory. And there's a production line in that factory. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment goes into that thing. And all that money is spent up front, essentially. So it's a sunk cost. Why? Well, they're not going to sell the factory. What they have to do is then run a product through there in order to sell cars to recover the funds that went into building the factory to begin with. And that becomes clear because you have, let's say, General Motors. They build an assembly line for their pickup truck. Well, it's different from a Ford pickup truck. And those assembly lines for a pickup truck are very, very specifically designed to do pickup trucks. General Motors can't run a sedan through the same line as a pickup truck. It's designed specifically for pickup trucks. And Ford can't run their vehicles through a General Motors assembly line because they're different. They're quite different. So that production line isn't of any value to Ford, so they wouldn't buy it. Now, there may be components in there. The robots might be, if General Motors wanted to close that line down and the robots were still reasonably modern, other manufacturers might pick up the robots, reprogram them, blah, blah, blah. But they're certainly not going to pay very good money for those robots because of the things that they're going to have to do to fiddle with them to get them to work in their own lines. So that production facility, the whole production facility, is very specifically designed for General Motors purposes. And the only way General Motors can recover the money invested is by producing vehicles and selling them. That's it. That's all. That's the only way they can get their money back. Something even more specific would be chip makers, computer chip makers. So Intel builds a chip manufacturing plant, and that's $1 billion. I mean, those things are so refined, so precise, so controlled. The environment is so precisely controlled that they're enormously expensive to build. And the only way they can recover the money is to build chips and sell the chips. And nobody else, like AMD is a chip maker. They're not going to buy the plant because it's specific for the designs that Intel came up with. AMD builds chips differently. And so the plant's no good to them. Doesn't have any value. And Intel is certainly not going to sell an Intel plant to AMD because it's all proprietary designs, proprietary methods, everything. It's all secret, right? So that's a sunk cost. $1 billion. It just gets spent and disappears into the ether until Intel sells enough chips to recover the funds. Now, in the corporate world, probably the craziest place for sunk costs has to be filmmaking. Now, filmmaking, so big movies, let's just stick with big blockbuster movies or animated movies, big successful animated movies. Those are ones easiest to identify with. It's a really unique business because every decision is a subjective choice. There really is no objective reasoning in filmmaking. Everything is based on subjective desires of the various players in the business. It's really crazy that way. A director says, "Can you make that cloud look happier?" Well, what does that mean? So it's a crazy business. And so you go through the process of making a big film, and it's pretty routine now to spend $100 million making a film. All of that money is spent up front. It's all gone. The actors have been paid, the production facilities have been paid, the advertising is all paid. It's all money spent. And the very strangest part of all that is that you have absolutely no idea, absolutely none, about whether you're going to get a dime of that money back until you put it in a theater and people start buying tickets. And it just doesn't matter how much marketing studies, test showings, anything. All of those things, they make you feel kind of a little bit more secure about spending the money. But all of that is just solves for your own brain to let you maybe sleep at night, because it can all go south in an instant for no particular reason at all that has anything to do with the quality or lack of quality of the film. A perfect example now is we have this virus emergency, and we have all sorts of films, big expensive films in the can that can't be shown in theaters. Nobody planned for that. There's no way you could do a market analysis and anticipate that. So all of that money's gone until you put it in the theaters and see if the people are going to like it at all. So corporate sunk costs, right? You spend all this money and you have to produce something and sell it before you can get your money back. Now, at the government level, that becomes a little bit more complicated. Everything in the government is essentially a sunk cost. That's not a bad thing, but pretty much everything is a sunk cost. What do I mean by that? Well, roads, bridges, they're all going to be a benefit to the general society. They've all become essential. But we don't get, the government in this case, doesn't get cash back from that. They spend billions of dollars to build this infrastructure, and that could include, your water treatment plants, your sewage plants, things like that. These are all things that are essential for the operation of our civilization as it is right now. And that's money that's spent, poured into all of this infrastructure, and you don't get any money back from that. You get a benefit, but in this case, it's not you're selling something and getting the benefit back. You're getting the benefit just from using it, from society using it for free, in a sense. Obviously, it's not free because we pay taxes. And even even things like education. Education is a broadly beneficial enterprise for a whole country. Okay? The more educated your population is, the better your entire country is going to be. Certainly better, more well off, more stable. And that's a worthy investment that we all more or less agree with. And even the ongoing investments that have to sustain these infrastructures are sunk costs. So you repair roads and you repair bridges and you reinvest or support your school systems. Those are sunk costs. You don't get a cash back for those. You just get a benefit from using those things. So those are all 3 levels of sunk costs. Now, why am I bringing this up in this fashion? Well, as I said, you don't get a direct cash benefit from these sunk costs. You get it by using them. But recently, and I would say in the last 40 years, really 20 years, has really brought this to the foreground, although I haven't seen anybody else describe the situation quite this way. But corporations have, and governments, but corporations is where I'll focus, have found a way to mine sunk costs, to extract a value from a sunk cost, to directly benefit them. And it's not that they're, it's their sunk costs that they're strip mining, as I said. It's other aspects of the general society that they've been able to find ways of extracting value without actually paying for it. So in this case, what I'm really talking about is the large corporations that pay little or no tax. Now, I know some people are going to freak out about that. Oh no, they pay some tax, they pay this, they pay that, and they're a benefit to society. Fine. Won't argue with that. They do pay some, but not enough. And they're even doing this in this process, and I'll get to it in a minute, internally to their own corporate infrastructure. So corporations don't build roads. It wouldn't make any sense. You're not going to get General Motors building highways for their cars. We had to, in general, as a society, decide that highways were a pretty good idea. And the better quality of the highway, the better your car is going to last on the roads. So it's a general benefit. But General Motors didn't pay for those highways. And certainly in the last 40 years, they've extracted an enormous value out of our use of the highways without actually paying what I would say is their fair share of the construction and maintenance of those highways. So they've extracted a value, an unfair value, from an infrastructure that we've all paid for. And you can look at that across the board as far as the infrastructure and the organizational structures that we've assembled and sustain through our taxes over the years. So our education systems have been suffering greatly in most recent times because we're not investing in it properly. And yet, the corporations who have benefited from tax cuts and bailouts, don't get me started on those, they have benefited from the educational system. Because unless you have an educational system, they can't hire competent people to work in their companies. And it's strange because historically, I mean, you go back to the beginnings of the auto industry, and a lot of the large corporations says, listen, we need better educated people. We need them to, work competently in our factories, and we need people that are capable of making better money to afford to buy our cars. I mean, they got it. And so they helped build an excellent education system. Not so much anymore. Excuse me. And so what we're doing now is strip mining a legacy system that's not being properly supported anymore. So we're still riding on a system that was built a long time ago, and we haven't properly invested back into the system recently. Corporations especially are guilty of this. So our infrastructure, our roads, our water systems, and are not being supported adequately. The roads are still there, so we can still drive them, and the corporations are extracting a benefit from that by not investing funds proportionate to the benefit that they're getting. Governments as well are riding on this in two ways. One, they're shifting money from one place to the other. So the education system gets hit all the time. It's an easy target. People saying, "Oh, the teachers are getting paid too much. There's extraneous stuff that's being taught that just isn't necessary," and it's an easy place where you can pull tax money out of and shift it to something else that's going to benefit the politicians. More insidiously, I would say, is the problem with the promises that politicians make in order to get elected. Now, we're all at fault because we want something from the politicians, and they promise us that, some glorious thing that is going to benefit us directly, we elect them. A politician says, well, no, we gotta rebuild all of our sewage systems all across the country. That's pretty boring subject and not something that you can generate a lot of excitement over, but it really would be a major benefit, not just now, but for decades to come, if somebody actually did that and got elected because of the policies, sensible policies like that. So what do politicians do instead? Well, they promise whatever, ridiculous things that cost an awful lot of money. And so they're relying on existing infrastructure to hold everything together while they, fritter away trillions of dollars now on things that aren't in the long term going to benefit a country. And they're incurring huge, huge debts that themselves are relying on old infrastructure that's not being properly invested in to sustain those debts. We're over-investing in areas, and I would suggest that the military is probably the biggest place where we are squandering huge amounts of money, especially in the United States. You have an overburden of military hardware, certainly stuff that's being built recently that's completely worthless. And really, when you get down to it, the entire military infrastructure is a complete, utter sunk cost, in the sense that it's designed never to be used. And hopefully that's true. But we still maintain these things. And we've become used to the notion, or certainly the corporations are getting used to the notion, that they don't actually have to build a competent piece of equipment to serve the military. They have these bloated, over-designed, useless pieces of hardware that makes them a lot of money, but is actually a danger to the soldiers that have to use them. So, strip mining sunk costs, extracting a benefit, but sacrificing infrastructure, especially sacrificing tax dollars, sacrificing the future. This is an enormous problem for all of us. Hi again. I needed to interject this one because I'd forgotten one aspect of the corporate strip mining sunk costs that's certainly in the news recently, and probably the most egregious problem with corporations, and that's stock buybacks. Now, what they're doing with stock buybacks is they are borrowing money and buying back their stock to increase or at least maintain the value of those stocks. And the corporate executives are directly benefiting from that with their own stock purchasing bonuses and incentives that they receive themselves. And when I'm talking about sunk costs in this case, is what they are is relying on the existing stability and capabilities of corporation to sustain these enormous debts in order to artificially hold up or inflate the value of their stocks. And this is an enormous problem because your corporation is being saddled with enormous debts that are unnecessary and have no benefit to the corporation as a whole. Especially in the sense that money that is being borrowed isn't being used to improve the corporation, isn't being reinvested into the infrastructure, isn't being used for new research or new products or anything like that. It is just to fatten the purses of the corporate executives and the shareholders. That is a big problem.